Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in our second installment of Asia Society France's Hot Take. They're sessions where we provide you with in-depth insights on a wide range of topics of d'actualité, as we say, to help us all better grasp current events. These sessions are really intended to be 30 to 45 minutes long, just perfect timings to really squeeze into your busy schedules, and for you guys to also have access to key insights from people of our rich network of expertise that we have to offer here at Asia Society France. For today's Hot Take session, we're hosting a debrief on the elections in Pakistan that took place this last Thursday with Financial Times correspondent for over 30 years, Farhan Bokhari, who is dialing in from Islamabad and who has published a lot on the elections, for those of you that have read his articles that we've shared with you in the last few days. As always, just to get the logistical stuff out of the way, please don't hesitate to leave your questions in the Q&A box on the bottom of your screens that we can get to at the end of this session. We will get started. Farhan, wonderful having you. Thank you so much for being here. I think I'll kick it off to you by starting off with just an overall and general question on the elections that took place this past Thursday in Pakistan that have garnered significant international attention. Can you provide us an overview of the major political parties involved, the key contenders of this past election?
Thank you very much, and good evening to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. For those of you, and I'm sure many of you have been following events out of Pakistan since last Thursday, and even before that, what happened on Thursday was quite spectacular. For at least 6 months before Thursday, the party of Imran Khan, Pakistan's former cricket star turned politician, former prime minister, that party was under huge pressure, and huge pressure on the face of it from a caretaker government, but caretaker government backed by the army, in local parlance known more as the Pakistani establishment. And for over 6 months, they did all sorts of things to practically box in to close down opportunities for this party, the Pakistan Justice Party, or the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, as it's known. So much so that their all too famous party symbol, a cricket bat, which is what Imran Khan's famous for, even that symbol was taken away from them systematically. According to the party itself, at least 10,000 of its activists and leaders have been arrested during this time. There have been some very high-profile cases, but other relatively low-level activists have been put in prison and remain in prison, many of them, according to the party. But what happened on Thursday was a huge shock. And it was a shock more so because of the number of seats that Imran Khan and his party still won, in spite of all the pressure. They won about 1/3 of the seats in the federal parliament, the lower house of parliament known as the National Assembly, and then also in the province of Punjab, and we can get into that later on, which is politically the most important and where almost 60% of Pakistanis live. There, they won about 40 to 45% of the seats. And this was considered, before election day, it was considered near impossible for them. What has happened, it seems, is that Pakistanis resentful of other parties, and also, mind you, reacting to very tough, very difficult economic times. In the last 1 year, inflation here at times has been running over 40%. Prices of essential goods have risen by anywhere between 30 to 70%, depending on what you look for. But items such as medicines, such as basic food supplies, everything priced for the essential, the average home, the prices have shot up. And during this time, I say this because I think it's got a very important connection to political behavior. In the last 1 year, I think I've come across more Pakistanis on the streets who've told me that they've had to take some of their children out of school, unfortunately, mostly the girls, in this traditional country, or at least part of the country being traditional, taken out of school because they could not afford enough basic food. They could not afford their food bills, so the daughters were taken out of school so that the family would save money on their education and put the bare minimum food on the table. So that's the kind of background. And in reaction to that, people have come out in large numbers. Imran Khan still remains on jail, and frankly, in all honesty, some of the charges against him have become a huge big joke. In my younger days, in the 80s, when I was a student in Europe, that was the first time that I joined an anti-apartheid march in central London and got to know about Mr. Mandela and other ANC members, and also met some of them for the first time. And some of those people who were faced with what seemed like very ridiculous charges. Here in 2024, at least one of the charge against Imran Khan, questioning the validity of what is known as the nikah, the exchange of Islamic vows that he did with his present wife, his third wife. And this was challenged in a civil court, and I think he and his wife were both handed down 7 years prison sentence each, which is quite ridiculous. I mean, it's really pushing the argument to what I would call a point well beyond a point of insanity, because this is something which is quite abnormal. Some of the other charges against him have also been ridiculed by people. And the question is whether, in the push to keep Imran Khan in prison for at least 10 years, if not longer, whether the authorities have pushed that pressure so greatly that it has added to the public resentment, and people have come out and voted for his party in much larger numbers than what was expected. And going forward, from the looks of it, we are heading towards a coalition government. So that's completely the opposite of a strong government that Pakistan needed. Pakistan is already, it seems, in informal negotiations with the IMF for another 3-year loan program. The market talk is that it's going to be anywhere between $8 to $10 billion, and it will come with some very difficult conditions. In the last year, Pakistanis have already come under a lot of pressure due to an existing IMF program and conditions tied to an existing IMF program. The government is also going to be under pressure to do things like privatizations, cutting expenditure, which might also indirectly affect social spending. Pakistan is in a very troubled neighborhood. Not too long ago, Pakistan and Iran exchanged missiles just in the last 4 to 6 weeks. Relations with India remain very tense. And so that is used as a justification for keeping defense spending high. Whether that's right or wrong, that's another chapter, and we can get into that. So it's a difficult situation, and for the new government to be able to hold this country together in such a difficult environment, and also impose more economic hardships on people, especially when the public mood is one driven by anger and resentment. That's not going to be easy. So Pakistan increasingly is heading towards, I think, what will be even a more unpredictable situation than what we've seen in the past. Now, finally, in the end, let me also say in this introduction, it's important to also point out, why should the world care about Pakistan? This is a question that I've been asked repeatedly in the last week to 10 days, foreign diplomats, some election observers as well. There are, for countries looking at Pakistan, there are principally three key reasons. There might be one or two more, but mainly three reasons. One, Pakistan is, after all, a nuclear armed country, which not recently, but a long time ago, was accused of proliferation, as a result of which Pakistan took established some very major safeguards. And I think that chapter is closed, but no one wants Pakistan in the least bit, for want of a better word, to act irresponsibly, and therefore that always works as one of the important sort of impetus to keep the relationship intact with Pakistan and not to take this relationship lightly. Second, let's not forget 9/11 came from Afghanistan, which is right next to Pakistan, and where the Taliban are ruling again today. How Afghanistan will unfold in the coming months, the coming years, very hard to predict. But Pakistan is the one country right next to Afghanistan which has at least a large enough conventional military force to be able to support a future repeat, should it ever come to that, of a post 9/11 type of an operation. And the third, the country itself, Pakistan does have a significant exposure to at least the regional capital markets. It's a country which owes more than $100 billion, by some accounts, even close to $130 billion in foreign debt. And if Pakistan goes under, and for the sake of argument, Pakistan defaults, as people feared last year after Sri Lanka, then it's going to be a very major upset for the global markets. So I think people do look upon that element as well. And then finally, Pakistan, for reasons to do with its tense relationship on the one side with India, as opposed to its close relationship with China on the other side. When global Western policy makers look upon Pakistan, they also look at those two factors. And I think for many governments outside Pakistan, it's important to be able to exert influence on Pakistan's behavior in relation to both of those relationships. And we can get into that if anyone is interested. So I think that pretty much sums up what I wanted to say. If there are any questions, I don't see any in the window, unless you can see any questions.
Yes.
Can you?
I can see them. We've gotten two so far. We have one question is, what about Pakistan and Iran? And another question for you is, what is China's reaction so far?
Well, the Chinese are very smart people. Once I was friends with a Chinese ambassador to Islamabad many years ago, and I asked him, what is the difference between China's diplomatic behavior as opposed to the US or Europe? And he said something very interesting. He said, China talk no, act more. Roughly translated that, the Chinese are quiet but they know how to act when they do so on background. And I think there is something to that. The Chinese typically will not come out publicly reacting to a situation such as this one. The Chinese haven't said anything publicly. I'm sure the Chinese must be watching this situation very carefully, very closely. But so far, the protests that we've heard of have taken place in a few sort of small towns, peripheral areas. They haven't come yet to the bigger cities. So no one is really talking about Pakistan becoming unstable, or the Pakistani streets becoming unstable. with that sort of background, I'm sure the Chinese, as before, will be advising the authorities, maybe also suggesting caution. They've done that before as well. But having said that, the Chinese have huge stakes in Pakistan. After all, Pakistan is the only friend and more than that, a military ally that China has in this entire region. You may or may not be aware, but in recent weeks, the Pakistan Air Force chief announced publicly that Pakistan is about to secure a Chinese stealth fighter plane, which would be the first time that such a platform would be introduced in South Asia. And that aroused a lot of interest among military watchers. It's an irony that this system, by some estimates, might cost up to $2 billion. And there are questions on how a country like Pakistan will afford that. But it's also a sign of the depth of this relationship. On the question of Iran, when the recent attack came, the Iranians first attacked, or the Iranian guards attacked a location in Pakistan, and the Pakistanis within 24 or 20, just over 24 hours retaliated. That was seen as, and I think it was something more unusual, because the history of Pakistan and Iran has been one of keeping their lines of communication open to the extent possible on sort of background. Pakistan values the fact that historically and even today, the Iranian border is the only border of Pakistan which is relatively secure, because other borders are next to Afghanistan, to India, and then the long maritime border along the Arabian Sea, where India in recent years has built up its navy quite rapidly. So the Iranian relationship is an important one. And Iran and Pakistan also have another common interest, which is Baluchistan. Southwestern Pakistan, the province of Baluchistan, remains a challenging area for Pakistan. There's an insurgency which has been going on for many years, and the Pakistanis have repeatedly banked on the reality, and I think it's an important reality, that the Iranians will never actively support this insurgency, because just across the border on the Iranian side, there's also the Iranian Sistan Balochistan province, which is seen as an irritant inside Iran as well. It's the only region which is Sunni Muslim, as opposed to the rest of Iran, almost 90%, which is Shia Muslim. So the two countries have a common interest to keep this border relatively kind of well managed. And it was interesting, after the recent two exchanges, the speed at which the Pakistanis and the Iranians moved so rapidly to try to mend their fences. Within a few days, the Iranian foreign minister was here. He was warmly received. He had very high-level meetings in Pakistan, suggested that the Pakistanis were also trying very hard, and so were the Iranians, to move beyond this rather unusual episode.
Thank you so much. We had more questions coming in for you, so I'm going to read those out for you. Can you go back, Farhan, to the security challenges Pakistan is facing from its regional neighbors, notably Afghanistan and Iran? I know you touched upon Iran just now. Is the relative weakening of the military establishment by Imran Khan's popularity going to affect the situation of Pakistan in the region overall?
I think these are two different matters. At least that's my view. And there's more than one reason for this. One reason is, of course, that Imran Khan's party has come out with a much stronger showing than what it was expected. But now the question is, how much can it prevail, both inside the parliament as well as outside the parliament? In other words, are we going to see people coming out in the streets and joining Imran Khan's party and its protests? That so far doesn't seem to be the outcome. In the last year or so, when inflation has been building up very rapidly, I mean, one interesting aspect of that entire situation has been that people have not come out to protest in large numbers. So I'm not sure whether we've quite reached that critical point. Maybe it'll happen in a few months, which is, and if it happens, then we'll have to look at it afresh. But right now, that's not the case. But also because the military internally of 500,000 strength is known to be one of the most well organized armies, certainly in this region and even in the world. And they have got a very large, in addition to the nuclear arsenal, they also have a very large conventional capability, which allows them to operate various places. Now, they've also taken lots of casualties. The numbers are quite large, but they've taken casualties and continue to do that on the region, especially on the Afghan border. But this has not in any way seemingly influenced their commitment to keep up the fight. So unless we see some evidence of a change or the beginning of a change in their behavior, I think it's hard to make that call.
And so then I'll ask you, it's a question that touches upon really just the last points here, is how can the establishment, aka the army, then regain the confidence, which is at an all-time low? What room for maneuver is there?
Well, that's a slightly complicated question to answer at this stage because you'll be just 4 days beyond the election. One, as I said earlier on, that how much defiance are Pakistanis willing to show in the face of this situation, and I'm not sure whether there's going to be a build-up of that defiance if people are going to come out and really protest hard. Then, if we end up in a situation where the PTI, and the PTI has a very large number of members, almost 1/3 of the National Assembly, the lower house of parliament, ultimately settle down more, reconcile themselves more for politics within the parliament, facing a government which will be making tough economic choices. I think you will find their response to the emerging situation more inside the parliament rather than on the streets. That is what it looks like right now. So the idea of new developments directly challenging the position of the establishment, people call it the establishment or the military. I'm not sure we're at that point yet.
Okay, understood. And maybe, I'll finish reading up the questions and then maybe you could touch upon kind of we've talked about maybe the dynamics between the PTI and the army, but then maybe where Nawaz Sharif's party comes into play. But we can touch upon that perhaps after I read the questions. We have two more for you as of now. One is, what about the relationship with the US if Trump were to win the election later this year? What about strategic alliances? And the last question I have on here is, what would be the political consequences of a Pakistani government meeting the IMF's demand for reforms? Who would be affected the most, and what would be the impact on political stability?
Well, on Trump, I think it's still early in the day. First of all, to make that call definitively, although the opinion polls and judging by what I hear from my American friends through email and so on, suggest that he's a very, very strong contender, strong candidate. But I think it's early in the day to know how another Trump presidency, if that was to be the case, would affect the U.S. Kind of behavior in this region and how it would deal with Pakistan and Afghanistan. I think that's still a bit distant. And so we have to see where that leads us. I know there are people, and I've been asked this question in Pakistan about the chemistry that Trump had with Imran Khan when Imran Khan was the prime minister, and whether this would this chemistry would translate into some kind of a Trump backing for Imran Khan. I'm not sure if that is how countries always behave or operate. The US has its own interests in Pakistan and the surrounding region, and I think primarily the US behavior will be driven more by how those interests evolve. So I think that's more going to be the case. I'm not sure it's something which is sort of immediate. Now, can you remind me of the other question, the second question?
Of course. What would be the political consequences of a Pakistani government meeting the IMF's demands for reforms? Who would be affected the most, and what would be the impact on political stability?
But my fear is that the ones who are going to get affected the most will be the poorest of the poor. I mean, that has been the case, what we've witnessed here in recent years. Whether that will translate into protests, into resentment, open resentment on the streets of Pakistan. As I said earlier on, one strange aspect or one strange part of Pakistani popular behavior has been that throughout these difficult times, inflation being 40% or even more, people have not really come out in large numbers on the streets of Pakistan to protest, which is really very strange in many ways, because you'd expect people to do that, but they haven't done that. Whether that will change in the coming months, I have no idea. And it's really hard to give a definitive call on that. Obviously, this is going to add to the unpopularity of the government, because they would be seen as the ones imposing hardships on the people of Pakistan. Part of the problem, long-term problem, this is really chronic and no one has been able to fix it, is that less than 2% of Pakistan's population pays an income tax. And yes, less than 2%. And even, let me rephrase that, less than 2% of Pakistanis are registered under the income tax scheme. The number who actually pay may even be fewer. So as you can see, they're driven by a very small, narrow sort of base of taxpayers. And for years, the IMF and other foreign lenders, donors have been telling successive governments to broaden the tax base, to reach out, to try to get more people in the tax net, but that hasn't quite happened. It's really due to lack of political commitment under successive Pakistani governments. Whether that will change, I just don't think. For right now, there's no indication that is even beginning to change. Whether the IMF will impose more pressure on Pakistan, will come down harder on the new government, and really urge them to deal with the tax net and to widen the tax net, maybe. If that happens, I think in the long run, that will be a good thing for the future of Pakistan. But this is all hypothetical. We can't say if it will happen or not.
Understood. Thank you for that. That was a very helpful response. And I want to use the limited time we have left to target another part of this election that you've spoken about, and I'd like, I know our members would be interested in. It's how political parties utilize tech and social media platforms in this election. What do you think, or what can you say? How has that affected voter turnout and engagement? And how, in that regard, or more, of course, how does has this election then been different than any other due to those things that maybe didn't play as big of a role before?
Thank you very much. That's a fascinating question, and it's one that I've written about in detail recently. When PTI held a political rally, and this was on I think partly on TikTok, partly on Facebook, but it was on social media. People were quite surprised when the opening took place through a speech by Imran Khan, who's in jail, but they did this speech using artificial intelligence. And this was quite new and really unprecedented in Pakistan. When I saw that speech, it immediately reminded me of the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Years ago, I was in Delhi, and that was a year, I think, before he was elected for the first time. BJP came out with this hologram sort of shining into the sky, and there was Modi speaking, and it was a broadcast, a speech which was simultaneously going out more than one location, which really caught the imagination of lots of people, young people, especially in India. Same thing here, Imran Khan appearing in this at this forum, and then other people connecting online. This is interesting. Another interesting piece of evidence of the world that we live in, and how telecom has really revolutionized our lives. Here we are on Zoom today. Few years ago, I don't remember except for Skype. Skype was there, but Zoom has really transformed the ability of ordinary people to attach visuals to real life, real time communication. And in this case, PTI used social media to its great advantage. There were TikTok videos that I saw being used by young people in villages, young people from low-income home, just an hour's drive from Islamabad, and regularly catching up with Imran Khan's messages, PTI's messages 2-3 times a day on their TikTok, while the party was practically banned from running TV commercials, or at one time, few months ago, TV channels were not even naming Imran Khan. That has changed now. But a few months ago, there was practically a restriction on them. So, of course, the world that we live in and the extent to which parties can use the social media and the way the world has transformed does give them a very major empowering sort of tool. And the beauty of this environment, unlike the past, is that ordinary people, poor people, you don't need money to have a very basic sort of phone. Not everyone is carrying an iPhone 15. There's some who are in Pakistan, even some who carry a very cheap Chinese smartphone, which costs the equivalent of about $50 or even less, $50-$60, and for some people that's half their monthly wage. So if it's someone who's a young bachelor and starting out as a low-wage kind of laborer, it'll take them a few months to save enough money to be able to buy a smartphone. And then there are internet packages which are available. So the extent to which people can access such individuals, and there are so many of them, the numbers have grown very rapidly, does make a difference to the way that the message gets transmitted.
Thank you for that. I think we're getting close to the 45-minute mark, so I'll leave you with a final question that I think will be a great conclusion, because you've given us so much to think about. Now we're leading up to the election last week, whether we're talking about the lead up, whether we're talking about election day, we're talking about a context of multi-crises, whether it's environmental or financial. There's a power vacuum at play. There's the dynamic between the PTI, the army, Nawaz Sharif's party that got 75 or 72 seats, if I'm not mistaken. Whether we're talking about the controversies, the allegations, the violence leading up to the elections. If I ask you now to look beyond the election results, what do you think are some of the key challenges that have to be addressed in the short term, knowing very likely, as you've said in today's session, but also as you've written about, the IMF deal could come to a close as soon as April, right, of this year. What do you think are strategies that will likely be adopted in the near future in order to best address those challenges?
Well, principally, the two big challenges that continue to surround Pakistan. One is the economy, and the other one is security against terrorism. The terrorism part is one that we didn't get into earlier on, but last year, I believe, if I remember correctly, the number of people who unfortunately died in terrorist attacks were almost twice as many from the year before that. This follows the Taliban return to Kabul and rule over Afghanistan, and the Pakistani allegation that Pakistani militants have crossed over into Afghanistan. Now they've got sanctuaries from the Taliban in Afghanistan, and they're launching attacks inside Pakistan. So that will be one. The other one will be the economy. I think on both of these fronts, in the short term, the new incoming government in itself will not necessarily be under pressure to present a kind of a new architecture, because the security situation is already under the army's leadership, and they're dealing with it. The economic situation, I think this caretaker interim government that will hand over power to the new government, I've heard from different people very reliably that they've already prepared a kind of a plan that will be formally presented by the new government to the IMF. But this is a plan that's been actively discussed in recent months. Austerity measures, which will be necessary to be put in return for IMF funding. But I think the big question in all of this is, and this is really the heart of the matter, which is that the number of seats that have been gained by Nawaz Sharif and the Pakistan People's Party, Benazir's son Bilawal, must shock them internally, because the number of seats are far below what was being predicted before the elections. So are these people going to realize that something has become very wrong with their politics, and they need some serious introspection followed by some very serious steps to rebuild their support within the public? That's really going to be pivotal to the future of these parties, because they stay around for whatever length of time. Pakistani elected prime ministers have a bad history of being able to complete their terms. I mean, this country, if I remember correctly, has not even had one prime minister, or maybe one prime minister in its entire history who's completed his or her term. So I think politicians really need to think very hard about what's happened. Why is it that people have gravitated so rapidly towards PTI? Why is it that there's such public skepticism towards the other parties, which are seen to be more status quo oriented? And really come up with a fresh look at their politics, and a fresh message backed by fresh actions. More of the same that they've done in the past will not work.
Well, Farhan, I think I speak on behalf of everybody on this call. You've given us a lot to think about, very, holistic view of everything, and, the significance of the elections themselves, the lead up, but also what we should keep in mind in the future. So with that, I thank you very much for being here with us, for taking the time. Thank you for the great work that you do. We love, reading you in the FT. Thank you to everybody who joined.